He called her steady as steel in front of their friends. He meant it as a compliment. He had no idea it was also a warning. Harper Parker had spent 9 years being the anchor in her marriage, the calm, composed, unshakable partner who kept everything ordered while her husband played the charming star of every room he entered. Then the small signs started appearing. A new wardrobe, a guarded phone, questions about her inherited property that felt less like pillow talk and more like due diligence. And then, at her own promotion party, he did the unthinkable. He announced, publicly, with a raised glass and a smirk, that he was going to start seeing other women. He told her to fight for him if she wanted to keep him. The room held its breath. Harper Parker did not cry. She did not beg. She smiled. Because she already knew what he didn't. Her name was forged on a $620,000 mortgage, and she had everything she needed to prove it. This story is a masterclass in one thing. When you live your life with integrity, the truth always finds a way to fight for you. If this resonated with you, hit like, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. This content was manually researched, constructed, and edited by our team with the sole intention of delivering meaning and real-life lessons to every listener.
I was standing right there, refilling the champagne flutes when he did it. He didn't just break up with Jessica, he publicly executed her. At a party celebrating her own company's success, Ethan raised a glass, and with that perfect, charming smile, announced he was exploring his options. He even had the nerve to suggest she should try to win him back. I heard her make this sound, a tiny, crushed gasp of air, and my first reaction, my trained, loyal assistant reaction, was to want to protect him. I had no idea yet that the public shame was a mercy compared to the financial ruin he was engineering for her in secret, a plan I was unknowingly helping him execute. You have to understand, Ethan Crawford had to win. Always. He saw everything as a game of leverage, and he truly believed he was a master strategist, keeping Jessica right where he wanted her. What he actually did was light the fuse on a bomb that took out his entire world. My name is Alyssa Grant, and I have to live with the fact that I helped the man I worked for, the man I admired, try to systematically destroy Jessica Warren. She's only 34, a powerhouse who built an incredible design firm from scratch, right here in Austin, a city that's supposed to be all about that kind of hustle. For a decade, that company, Warren Staging and Design, was everything to her. Her whole business was built on seeing what others missed. She knew the real danger was never the obvious threat. It was always in the details. A tiny crack in a foundation, a single fraudulent invoice for a $15,000 sofa, the nervous flicker in a client's eyes when they lied about their budget. I handled his invoices, so I should have seen it coming. Jessica is an artist, a true perfectionist who sees the story in an empty room. Her team used to say she could spot a structural flaw from a mile away. I used to think that was just a cute saying I'd overhear when booking her services for our corporate events. Now I know it's a heavy burden. Her mind is literally built to find the inconsistency, the one thing that's out of place. It must be lonely to always see the break in something beautiful, but that's the skill that made her a success. And for 9 years, she thought my boss was structurally sound. Ethan is 39, a big deal in private equity, and his charm is his greatest asset. He has this laser-focused way of making you feel like you're the most important person in the room, that your success is his only goal. I know this because I was the first person he practiced it on the day he hired me. I fell for it completely. When he got together with Jessica, it seemed like the perfect merger. He was the high-risk player. She was the meticulous planner. He was the grand public gesture. She was the quiet, brilliant work. I was genuinely happy for them. They were the ultimate power couple. They told everyone they were waiting to have kids, focusing on their careers first. I was the one who had to schedule their lives to make that story believable. Their home wasn't for a family, it was a statement. A gorgeous, minimalist house in a neighborhood I could only dream of, with a stark, perfect garden that cost more than my car. Their friends were just as meticulously chosen. the kind of people I'd serve drinks to while they discussed market trends and capital gains on a Sunday. I was just part of the scenery. I remember dusting the picture frames in his office. All these perfect glossy photos of them laughing in Bali or skiing in Aspen. Their life looked like it was staged for a magazine, flawless and completely out of reach. To everyone in our circle, they weren't just a couple. They were an aspiration. Ethan was always going on about how calm she was. He'd tell our biggest investors that Jessica was his anchor. He'd pull her close at company parties, right in front of me, and say she could take all the chaos of his world and turn it into something serene and beautiful. He called her his sanctuary. She was the peaceful harbor he came back to after battling it out in the boardroom. And from what I could tell, she loved being that for him. Jessica honestly thought they were equal partners, building the same future, respecting each other's ambitions. She had no idea his blueprint was entirely different from hers. But she told me later, after everything fell apart, that for the last year, the atmosphere in that perfect house had started to feel wrong. It wasn't one big thing. There were no fights, no drama, nothing obvious I could overhear on the phone. It was more like a slow rot, like when you smell something faintly sour and you just know, somewhere out of sight, something is dying. I saw it at the office first. It started with how he looked. Ethan was always sharp with his tailored suits and classic watches. But then he started pouring all this money and energy into a new image, like he was trying to be 28 again. Honestly, it was cringy to watch. I was the one signing for the deliveries. These ridiculously overpriced hoodies, shirts that were way too tight, and trendy sneakers he would have openly mocked a year ago. And his smell changed. He walked by my desk one evening, and the cologne was so aggressive and musky it almost made me cough. It was nothing like the clean, subtle scent he'd worn for years. When Jessica apparently asked him about it, he just blew her off. Then came the phone. That thing became a permanent extension of his hand. It was always face down on his desk, and I started catching him with these weird, secret little smiles while he was texting under the conference table. A notification would light up the screen, and this quick, smug little smirk would flash across his face. The second I'd walk into his office, the smile was gone and the phone was in his pocket. He was so smooth about it, so practiced. It was like watching a professional card cheat hide a king. Jessica wasn't the jealous type. Her entire career is built on trusting her instincts, not snooping. But I was the one actively covering for him. I put the fake new client meetings on his calendar. I took the calls from a woman named Megan Wells and told him she was on the line. I was the one who had to tell Jessica he was tied up at the office, knowing he'd left 2 hours earlier. I was his alibi. Every little thing was just slightly off, but the strangest part was his sudden obsession with a commercial property she owned. Her grandfather had left her an old warehouse years ago, long before she met Ethan, in a part of downtown that was now prime real estate. It was this beautiful old brick building, and it was 100% hers, the deed solely in her name. It was where her business started. She was smart, and she kept its finances completely separate from their joint accounts. For years, I'd heard Ethan condescendingly call her company her little project. Something cute, but not on the same level as his own work. Then, all of a sudden, he was laser-focused on it. He had me digging up zoning regulations and running property value comparisons. He started asking me to draft emails to her, casual-sounding questions about the title and her profit margins, all under the guise of being a supportive, helpful partner. But I knew him. His interest wasn't supportive. It felt predatory. The questions were too specific, too technical. The whole act was just so fake, it was about to shatter. My moment of clarity, when the fear finally pushed past the loyalty, came on a Tuesday afternoon when the mail arrived. Sitting in my inbox tray was a certified mail envelope in a hideous shade of green. You couldn't miss it. It was addressed to Jessica Warren at our office address. The return address was a corporate law firm I'd never heard of. My standing instruction from Ethan was that all of Jessica's mail that came to the office went directly to him, unopened. As I was about to put it aside for him, he walked out of his office. He saw the green envelope on my desk, and all the color drained from his face. He didn't say a word. He just lunged for it, snatching it off my desk so fast he knocked over my pen holder. He gave me this look, a terrifying mix of panic and command, and disappeared back into his office, slamming the door. He never said a word about it, and I never saw that envelope again. I didn't ask. I just sat there, under the fluorescent lights of the office I used to love, feeling this cold certainty that I was now an accessory to something awful. There wasn't a paper trail I could see yet, but I knew. My gut, the one I'd trained to anticipate every need of a demanding boss, was screaming at me. When a man starts intercepting and hiding legal documents from his own fiancée, it is never, ever, because he's planning a surprise party. It's an act of war. The perfect life I had helped him build and maintain was cracking open, and through those cracks, I could see the shape of a cold, calculated betrayal. Ethan thought Jessica was just a quiet artist he could manipulate. He forgot she built an empire from an old, forgotten building. He also forgot that his quiet assistant saw and heard everything. It was around 1 a.m, a few weeks later when I was working late, trying to untangle his messed-up expense reports, that I saw it. An email confirmation for a new payee authorization I had processed earlier that week. Apex Holdings, a new entity set up for large recurring wire transfers from their joint accounts. It was authorized by Ethan, using a power of attorney document I had notarized for him. Sitting there in that silent, empty office, it all clicked into place. The warehouse research, the hidden mail, the new untraceable shell company. My reality just collapsed. I wasn't just his assistant anymore. I was the person who had set up the account that was being used to bleed his fiancée dry. My fingerprints were all over the weapon. It all started with a lie, like most things with Ethan did. Not a big one, just a little bit of corporate speak to make me feel important. He called me his chief of staff, but I was his executive assistant. And as I learned over the next 6 months, I was also his alibi, his co-conspirator, and the ghost in his marriage. My job was to manage his life, and I quickly realized that meant managing his second life, the one built on a foundation of secret credit cards and burner phones. You have to understand how charming he was. When he first mentioned his wife, Sarah, it was with this tired, patient sigh. He'd talk about her being anxious over a new car he'd leased or a business trip I'd just booked. He'd say she just didn't get the kind of pressure he was under, and I bought every word of it. I saw myself as the one who understood him, the one who could keep up with his ambition while she was dragging him down. I was his partner in success. He taught me the language of his deception. Those early morning strategy sessions were just a line I was supposed to use if Sarah ever called the office looking for him. When he got the silver Porsche, he had me draft an email detailing it as a client-facing corporate vehicle. I was helping him build the fantasy. I was handing him the scripts he'd take home to his wife, never once thinking about the woman on the other end of those lies. I thought her silence meant she believed him. I actually felt a little smug about it, like we were a team and our plays were working perfectly. It makes my skin crawl to think about that now. Sarah wasn't silent because she was convinced. She was silent because she was watching. She was collecting the little pieces of our deception, starting with the receipts I so carefully filed under miscellaneous corporate expenses. I remember ordering those flowers. Pink peonies. He stood over my shoulder, dictating the card. For my one and only, he'd said with a wink. The charge was just over $200. He told me to put it on the corporate account, the one Sarah didn't have access to. I also made the reservation for that French restaurant, the one he claimed was a boring work dinner. I was the one who got the confirmation email. $300 on champagne and oysters. I know because I processed the expense report. He texted me that night, a picture of a sad-looking slice of pepperoni pizza with the caption, "The Glamorous Life." He was building his narrative of the overworked husband, and I was his willing audience. I would have sworn on a Bible it was a business dinner. The real sickness, though, came from the digital tracks I helped him cover up. He never called it what it was. He came to my desk one afternoon and asked me to do some due diligence on a small commercial property, an art studio. He said it was a potential acquisition for a new holding company. It wasn't until I pulled the county records that I saw the owner's name, Sarah Crawford. A cold feeling washed over me, but I pushed it down. He was the boss. I did what I was told. I was the one who filed the title status update request. It was all electronic, a few clicks on a government portal. It felt so sterile, so disconnected from the reality of what I was doing. He had no legal right to that building. It was hers, from her grandmother. I just sat there staring at the confirmation on my screen, feeling like I had just helped him break into her house. I imagined her getting the notification email, her world tilting on its axis. I imagined her searching the public records and seeing the pending request I had just filed, a request to begin the process of transferring her own property into a company he controlled. He was stealing from her, brick by brick, and I was the one handing him the tools. I was the one who clicked the box to make the filing confidential. He told me it was standard procedure to avoid speculation. It wasn't. It was to make sure she couldn't see the details, to keep her in the dark while he systematically tried to erase her name from her own inheritance. The war had started, and he had made me his primary weapon. He started confiding in me more after that. He'd talk about how suffocating things were at home, how his mother was visiting and just making everything worse. He'd spin these long, elaborate stories of his victimhood, and I'd listen, my head full of a poisonous sympathy. I thought I was helping him navigate a difficult marriage. I was actually just validating his cruelty. I remember one late-night call so clearly. He was whispering, hiding in his own home office. "She just doesn't understand ambition, Alyssa," he'd said. "A man like me needs to be free to build an empire." I ate it up. I told him he was right. I told him he deserved to win. I was greasing the wheels for his betrayal, convincing him it was his destiny. My advice was his ammunition. I was giving him the talking points he needed to justify the unjustifiable. I told him his happiness should be his priority. I didn't see myself as a homewrecker. I saw myself as a kingmaker. I was the one whose name would flash on his phone screen at midnight, a constant reminder of the life he really wanted. He'd snatch the phone up if I called when she was in the room. I could hear muffled sounds, the water running in the background. He'd come back on the line a minute later, his voice smooth and low. "Work crisis," he'd say. "Handled." It wasn't the voice of a man handling a crisis. It was the voice of a man living a lie that I was making possible with every scheduled call and every booked flight. That voice was my drug. It was the sound of being chosen, of being on the inside. I wasn't just his assistant anymore. I was his partner in a secret enterprise, a life he was building behind his wife's back. And then he asked me to do something that took this whole dark game to a new level, something that finally made me see the monster behind the man. "I need a high-quality picture of Sarah's driver's license." He said it so casually, leaning against my desk, scrolling through his phone. It was a Tuesday morning. He looked like the kind of handsome, successful man you see in a magazine ad, the kind of man I used to dream about working for. He already had the story ready. A new exclusive social club was opening, and a board member had offered to get them on the list. But the club needed high-resolution copies of their government IDs immediately to bypass the wait list. The lie was so perfect, so detailed. It was designed to create urgency and flatter her at the same time. I felt a little thrill helping him craft it. He practiced his smile on me, the one that could charm anyone into doing anything. But it didn't work on her. He called me later that day, his voice tight with an anger I'd never heard before. She'd just smiled, he said, and told him her ID was buried in her purse and she was late for a meeting. She promised to send it later, and then she walked out of the house. He knew in that moment that she knew. The game had changed. He hung up on me, but I could feel his rage radiating through the phone. For the first time, I felt a tremor of fear. A man having an affair doesn't need a forged ID. A cheater doesn't need to steal legal documents. This wasn't about sex or romance. It was a corporate takeover of a human life. He was preparing to financially gut his wife, and I was his chief operating officer. All my work, the calls, the fake expenses, the title search, it was all part of it. I was just a pawn, a useful tool to distract from the real crime. He was planning a hostile takeover of her entire existence, and it all clicked when he told me about the dinner party for her design company, a company he was actively trying to steal. She had built that business from nothing over 7 years. The party was to celebrate her biggest contract yet. It was her night. He told me his plan for the evening over lunch, laying it all out like a military campaign. "I have to be the perfect supportive husband," he'd said, "especially tonight." For 2 hours, he played the part. He told me all about it on the phone later, gloating, how he had been the most attentive, most loving husband in the room. It makes me want to be sick. He wasn't just acting, he was manufacturing a public persona, and I had been coaching him for months. He refilled her wine. He put his hand on the small of her back. He made sure every single person in that room saw how utterly devoted he was. He was establishing his character for the final act, the good husband, about to be tragically wounded by a wife he loved so dearly. Every time someone congratulated her, he would step in and add his own praise, louder than anyone else's. He was setting a trap in front of all her friends, creating an alibi for his own character before he even revealed his crime. He was making himself the victim in a tragedy he was writing. And then, at 9:30, he stood up and tapped a knife against his wine glass, a single clear note that cut through the rooftop chatter. He described the sound to me later, the pride in his voice. It was the sound of the curtain rising on his one-man show. It was her party, her success, her moment. And he stood up in the middle of it and made it all about him. He adjusted the blazer I had picked up from the dry cleaner for him and looked at the crowd of her friends as if they were there to see him. And then he started his speech, a speech he and I had gone over just the day before. He took her professional triumph and twisted it into a story about his own personal struggle. He talked about growth and change, using all these hollow corporate buzzwords to paint his own selfishness as some kind of noble awakening. He used words like realignment and personal evolution. I knew them by heart. I had typed them into a memo for him. He was creating a world where his betrayal wasn't a betrayal at all, but a courageous act of self-discovery. He looked right at his wife and told a dozen of her closest friends that their marriage was holding him back. Then he announced that he needed to start dating other people. He didn't say divorce. He didn't say separation. He said with a face full of fake sincerity that he was beginning a journey of exploration, and he hoped she would support him. He was asking for a hall pass to cheat and framing it as a favor to her. He told her, right there, that if she truly loved him, she'd give him this time to find himself, and that her patience would prove she was the right woman for him in the end. He was turning his marriage into the Hunger Games. He was telling his wife to sit at home and compete with me and anyone else he chose for the grand prize of being Mrs. Ethan Crawford. And that's when I knew. I wasn't his partner. I was just the first replacement, and I was next. Jessica told me you could have heard a pin drop. She said Ethan's own father just froze, that his mother's face went completely pale. She was witnessing the man she had built a life with become a monster in real time. And I have to live with knowing I helped build that monster. I was the one who managed his calendar of lies, who polished his charm until it was a blade, and he was just sitting there, my boss, Ethan, swirling that expensive wine in his glass with this sickeningly serene expression, as if he'd just committed some act of profound honesty. He was just waiting for her to come apart at the seams. I know him. I knew in my gut he'd engineered that whole dinner just to publicly break her. He was counting on her to fall apart. He craved the screaming match, the tears, the desperate pleading. He needed to be the villain and the prize in his own pathetic drama. And he had cast Jessica in the role of the hysterical wife who couldn't function without him. In that one terrible, stretched-out silence, she said everything shifted for her. She looked at the man she had loved for a decade and saw him for what he really was. This wasn't some brave confession. It was a strategy. He was creating a cover story, a preemptive strike so that when his financial empire imploded, she would be the one to blame. He was trying to cast her as the unstable, obsessive wife who couldn't handle his supposed new reality. A public scene would have cemented that narrative perfectly, but she refused to play her part. I can picture it, her eyes taking in his expensive suit, the perfectly knotted tie, and that disgusting, expectant look on his face. And then she laughed. It wasn't a loud or hysterical sound. She said it was a quiet, almost soft, but utterly genuine laugh. The sound just slipped out of her, and it sliced right through the suffocating tension in the room. It was the kind of laugh that can make a man who sees himself as a god feel like an absolute clown. Ethan's carefully constructed mask of solemn sympathy just disintegrated. His brow tightened, and she said for one brief second, she saw a flash of raw, undiluted panic in his eyes. He put his wine glass down, his whole body suddenly rigid. Jessica calmly picked up her napkin, folded it with precision, and set it next to her plate. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was so level it was chilling, completely stripped of any emotion. She looked at a point somewhere past his shoulder, speaking just loud enough for everyone to hear. She told him she doesn't audition. She said she refused to compete for a role she already had, especially not in some sick, public performance he had orchestrated. The blood rushed to his face. He knew his entire power play had just gone up in flames. He began to stammer, trying to walk it back, putting his hands up like he was surrendering. He tried to slip back into that calm, patronizing tone, telling her she was misunderstanding his intentions. He kept saying it was just an honest conversation about their future, peppering his speech with therapy jargon he'd weaponized to regain the upper hand. But he'd already lost the room. His father, Liam, was just staring at his dinner plate, a muscle working furiously in his jaw. His mother was giving him a look that could curdle milk. We all saw him for exactly what he was in that moment. We saw the casual brutality. We saw him trying to disguise his poison with pretty, hollow words. Jessica told me she stood up before he could even form his next pathetic excuse, and I felt a surge of pride for her. She picked up her purse from the table. She turned to his parents, Liam and his wife, and with a genuine smile thanked them for a lovely dinner, even complimenting the meal. She never looked at Ethan again. She just walked across the patio, and the sound of her heels on the stone was crisp and final. She told me about the ride home on the phone later, how she pushed the call button for the elevator, got in, and let the metal doors close on the wreckage of his little stage play. She said she didn't cry on the way down to the garage, not when she tipped the valet and not for the entire 20-minute drive home with the city lights blurring past her window. The grief, she said, was just gone, like it had been surgically removed, leaving only a cold, sharp-edged clarity. The woman who walked into their house that night was no longer a heartbroken wife. She was a crime scene investigator, and her work was just beginning. She said she threw her keys on the counter and went straight to her office. The way she described it, she sat in her chair and cracked her knuckles as her work laptop hummed to life. It was a little after 11 p.m. My boss thought he was playing a brilliant game of four-dimensional chess. He had no idea she was about to launch a forensic audit of their entire life. And he had no idea that I was the one who had, unknowingly, left her all the clues. She painted me the picture. Just the cool glow of her dual monitors lighting up her face in the dark. The only sound in their huge house was the whisper of the air conditioning. She pulled the deed history for a commercial building he always claimed was his, over on the south side. I was the one who sent her the file. My hand was shaking when I hit send on that email, the one with the brand new mortgage document attached. It was for $620,000 taken out against her property. Her name, Sarah Crawford, was right there on the borrower line. She told me later her heart didn't even flutter. She said there was no gasp, no shock, just this intense, cold clarity that washed over her. I had told her to download the entire application package to look past the forged signatures I knew he was so good at. I pointed her to the metadata, the digital breadcrumbs that would prove the exact second Ethan committed the crime. It was signed on the second Tuesday in October at 3:15 in the afternoon. She said she pulled up her calendar on the other screen and scrolled back. On that date, at that exact time, she was 300 miles from here, leading a client audit in a conference room in Richmond, Virginia. She was giving a presentation on corporate financial compliance while Ethan was forging her name on a loan against her own asset. A mortgage of that size needs a notary public to witness the signature. She scrolled down to the remote notarization section of the application, and that's when it hit her. The ID verification was a high-quality scan of her state driver's license. She leaned in closer to the screen. It wasn't her current license. It was the one that had expired 2 years ago. She knew the file instantly, she said. He'd pulled it from the massive digital archive I had helped them create when they refinanced their house 5 years back. I remember him telling me it was crucial to keep a complete digital copy for their records. The notary was from some bargain basement online service that probably rubber stamps anything for a price. Or, she thought, he might have hired an actress who vaguely resembled her old photo. Ultimately, the how didn't matter as much as the sheer, breathtaking nerve of it all. $620,000 is a staggering amount of money. In their world, that kind of cash isn't just sitting in a checking account. She found the wire transfer instructions in the loan package. The money hadn't gone into their joint savings or any of their brokerage accounts. The entire sum was wired to a brand new business account for a company called Blue Alder Holdings, an LLC she had never even heard of. My blood ran cold when she said that name. I opened my own files. She didn't have to look it up on the state business portal. I had the paperwork right there. I'm the one who filed it for him. The sole managing member of Blue Alder Holdings was Ethan Crawford. He told me it was for a silent investment. As soon as the wire landed, he started dicing it up and moving it around. It was a classic money laundering technique. She followed the digital breadcrumbs from one account to the next. The biggest chunk was a huge, non-refundable deposit on a gorgeous new luxury condo being built in the Arts District. Then another wire that made me feel physically ill. $45,000 to a company named Winnelier Staging. I processed that invoice. She found the automatic monthly payments for a luxury corporate apartment he was leasing in the most expensive part of Charlotte. The rest of the money was just bleeding out everywhere. I remembered the invoices for private jets for weekend getaways, the receipts from beachfront 5-star hotels, and the massive payments to high-limit credit cards I never knew existed, all registered to a P.O. box I had set up for him. The whole ugly truth unraveled after that night. After he finally moved out, Jessica called me. Her voice was hollow as she walked me through the financial wasteland she was uncovering, all alone in that big, quiet house. She'd finally gotten into their main joint account, the one they had shared for nearly a decade. She pulled the last 8 months of bank statements and got to work. The spreadsheet she built told a chilling story of a slow, deliberate financial strangulation. It began 7 months ago, she said. That's when my boss started secretly shrinking his direct deposits into their shared life. For the last 3 months, he had contributed exactly nothing. He had, with a quiet and stunning cruelty, just stopped paying for the home that he lived in. While he was using their assets to buy his new condo and furnish a life with someone else, Jessica had been carrying 100% of their mortgage, their insane property taxes, all the utilities, and their massive insurance bills. He was basically a squatter in his own marriage, hoarding every penny he made to finance his grand escape, and I was the one who had helped him pack his bags. I only learned later what she had to do to see the truth, the whole disgusting picture. She somehow got into his private cloud storage. Ethan, for all his meticulous planning, had carelessly saved an admin password on their home network, and that was all it took. She must have spent hours scrolling through endless, mind-numbing work files before she hit the jackpot, a folder named with a meaningless string of random numbers. And there it was, his grand design laid out in a single spreadsheet, mapping a future that had no room for her. I heard that, on the second tab, she found the address to her own studio apartment, the little brick place she'd owned forever, long before him. He'd put it in a column he actually titled Classification, and next to it were 4 words that still make me sick: liquid revolving marital asset. He wasn't looking at her home, he was looking at his personal ATM. I used to think my boss, Ethan, was just driven. A little ruthless, maybe, but that's how you get ahead. But what she uncovered wasn't ambition. It was a strategy to suck every dime of equity from her property, stick her with a fraudulent loan in the divorce, and then just walk away into a new life he'd built with her inheritance. The cold, calculated nerve of it all just vaporized any respect I ever had for the man. He wasn't just ending a marriage. He was executing a corporate takeover of her life. The plan was to ruin her finances, shatter her reputation, and destroy her feeling of safety anywhere she went, all so he could build himself a golden parachute. If she had been anyone else, anyone who didn't spend her career hunting men just like him, it would have broken her into a million pieces. But Jessica just sat there in his home office, completely silent. She didn't scream or cry. She just opened a drawer, pulled out one of those encrypted military-grade flash drives, and with a terrifying, calm precision, she started copying everything. Every single document, every wire transfer, every forged signature and fake invoice. She downloaded every last pixel of his disgusting little plan. She was smart enough to make 2 identical copies of that drive. She later told a friend who told me that the very next morning, she drove the main one to a private bank on the other side of the city. She locked it in a safe deposit box he would never even know existed. Then she shut down the computer and just sat there, alone in the dark, letting it all sink in. In that one moment, she stopped being a wife discovering an affair and became what she actually was, a senior fraud investigator looking at a pristine crime scene. And she was about to use the very evidence Ethan had so arrogantly compiled to completely destroy him. The more she looked, the more their entire 9-year life together just dissolved into a series of cold, vicious legal maneuvers. She'd gotten past his joke of a password hours ago, but what she found next was like looking directly into the mind of a predator. It was a subfolder with a simple, chilling name, just the letter V, lowercase. It wasn't full of pictures of other women or secret bank accounts. It just held a few simple text files. Just hearing the names of those files made my stomach clench. They sounded like chapter titles from a manual on how to psychologically destroy someone. One was called If She Resists. Another was named Narrative for Mediation. And a third, one he'd worked on just 2 nights before the big blow-up, was titled Do Not Let Her Control the Narrative. She opened each one, her face lit by nothing but the screen's cold glow. She was reading a literal script he had written on how to systematically dismantle her, both in private and in public. The mediation file wasn't just a few notes. His arguments were laid out with a terrifying surgical precision. He had written entire paragraphs, rehearsing the exact lies he was going to tell the lawyers. He'd created this whole fake history where their marriage had been, in his words, emotionally open for more than 18 months. He wrote with this smug confidence about how they'd both mutually drifted apart and agreed to move past what he called restrictive monogamy. In the world he was inventing, telling her he was seeing other people wasn't a betrayal at all. No, he framed it as the logical next step in their mature, evolved relationship. It was a complete masterclass in gaslighting, all typed up and ready to be deployed. I felt sick knowing I had helped create the space for him to write it. Then she opened another file. This one was a list of his social objectives. The second bullet point on that list still makes my blood run cold. It spelled out his plan to intentionally trigger a massive public emotional breakdown. He wrote that he needed to do it when she was surrounded by people she trusted. He wanted their friends, people they'd known for years, to see her have a complete meltdown. He needed witnesses who could later say that she was unhinged, pathologically jealous, and emotionally unstable because she couldn't handle his honesty. That was the whole point of his big speech at his mother's dinner party. He was staging a play where she was the crazy wife, and I, his loyal assistant, had unknowingly helped set the stage. Her staying so quiet and cold must have completely wrecked his script. But the sickness, I learned, ran in the family. In another folder, she found backed-up text messages between Ethan and his own mother, Darlene. Jessica scrolled back for weeks. Darlene knew. She knew every single detail. And she wasn't just some passive observer feeling bad from the sidelines. She was an active participant, his co-conspirator. Her texts were filled with the most toxic advice, all wrapped in the sweet language of a loving mom. Jessica saw a message from Darlene, sent at 8 in the morning on a Sunday, telling Ethan to keep pushing Jessica's buttons, to find her sore spots and exploit them relentlessly. She told him to wear her down. Darlene actually wrote to him that a woman whose world is falling apart will do anything to feel wanted. His own mother gave him a playbook on how to engineer his wife's psychological collapse. All those times Darlene would pop into the office, bringing cookies and asking about my day, now seemed so much more sinister. She would sit right there in Jessica's kitchen, drinking tea, while secretly coaching her son on how to methodically destroy her. And then Jessica found out exactly how he kept his two lives from colliding, how nobody at our firm ever got suspicious. She found the entire message history between him and me, his executive assistant, Alyssa. I knew, and I was helping him cover his tracks, helping him avoid any professional damage. We spoke in this gross, coded corporate language. He'd tell me to book an overnight trip for Project Delta or schedule a late dinner to align with a new vendor. Jessica then matched those dates to the paper receipts she'd found in his suitcase. Project Delta was a weekend at a 5-star resort with another woman. The vendor alignment meeting was a $300 dinner at some fancy French place. I had turned my access to his work calendar into a weapon against his wife. I made his affair look like a series of perfectly documented, legitimate business expenses, providing an ironclad alibi for every single hour he was gone. The sheer size of the lie started to poison everything, even her good memories. For the last 6 months, they had been going to marriage counseling every other Tuesday. She actually believed he was trying, that he wanted to fix the distance that had grown between them. She thought they were building a bridge. She had no idea he was just sitting there in a therapist's office, twisting their shared past into a weapon he could use in court. She didn't know that while he was buying her dinner and promising her a future, he was also building a legal case against her, brick by brick. He was creating a perfect record of a cold, difficult wife who drove him away, performing for a therapist who was just taking notes for his future divorce lawyer. It makes my stomach turn to even imagine it. Every sob story he told that therapist about his loveless marriage was a line he had practiced. Every sad look he gave her across a table was probably just an act he was testing out. He wasn't using therapy to fix his marriage. He was using it to document its death in a way that ensured he was the only one who would profit. He turned a doctor into his accomplice, and I was the one booking the appointments. The truth didn't finally break because of some detective or a suspicious credit card charge. It came from Jessica herself, her voice shaking when she finally called a friend and laid it all out. She told her about the other woman, who didn't show up to yell, but to deliver a folder. And inside that folder was a spreadsheet Ethan had made called Exit Calculation Draft. It was his whole sick plan, detailed in cold, heartless numbers. It's funny what you remember when your life implodes. For me, it was the specific shade of blue on the wire transfer confirmation screen. I was sitting in a sterile conference room with his wife, Jessica, and her lawyer, staring at my own work computer. We scrolled past their home, their retirement accounts, everything they were supposed to have built together. And then I saw the line item I'd been dreading, the one I knew existed but had never seen in this context: joint marital liabilities. A $620,000 commercial mortgage, a loan I now knew was secured against Jessica's inheritance, using a signature I was sure Ethan had forged himself. I listened as Jessica explained his plan, her voice hollowed out and flat. He was going to stand up in court and claim this massive fraud was just a shared marital debt. He was weaponizing the law, trying to force the woman he'd robbed to pay him back for half of the crime. Half of the money he'd already poured into a whole other life. A life, I realized with a sick, twisting feeling in my gut, that he'd launched with champagne toasts at a dinner party I helped organize. I just sat there, phone records and email chains spread across my desk, and replayed the last year in my head. Every single can't-miss investment he'd bragged about, every large check he'd told me to wire. That night on their rooftop, the one he claimed he'd confessed everything to Jessica, it was all crap. He wasn't coming clean. He was building himself a legal defense. He was planting a date in her memory, creating a timeline for a story he was already scripting for a judge. I know because I took the dictation for his personal journal entry about it the next morning. In that instant, every charming story, every compliment Ethan had ever given me, curdled into something ugly. The whole image he'd crafted, this persona of a brilliant, devoted family man, wasn't just a lie. It was the weapon he used to get close. For Jessica, her marriage didn't just end with a sordid affair. It was completely erased by the knowledge that none of it, not a single moment, had ever been real. She told me later what it felt like, that cold, hard realization that she had never been a partner, only a target in a very long game. There was no more space for wondering what she did wrong, no more self-blame. All that was left was this horrible, crystal-clear certainty. He hadn't just cheated on her, he had systematically dismantled her financial future, using the trust she had given him as his primary tool. That was the moment my boss, Ethan Crawford, stopped being a complicated man or a bad husband. He became a case file number, a white-collar criminal. And Jessica, this woman who always treated me with such kindness, had to become the person who put him in a cage. All the sympathy in the world was useless. She had to build an airtight case to stop him from taking everything else she had left. And I had to decide if I was going down with him. The first piece of the puzzle, the one that started it all, was a $45,000 wire transfer. I'm the one who sent it. It was for something called the Sinclair Condo Project. I remember Ethan pitching it over a conference call, sounding so smart and convincing. It sounded completely legitimate. For Jessica, it was the first loose thread she could pull. For the woman on the other end of that wire, it was the start of a beautiful future. A future built entirely on stolen money. Jessica told me she looked up the recipient's business, fully expecting a shell corporation or a post office box. But it was a real company, a big, impressive warehouse downtown. And the woman, Celeste, was real too. Jessica described walking in on a Thursday afternoon and seeing her, this Celeste, directing a work crew, totally in charge, with no idea that the woman standing by the door was about to detonate her entire world. And there she was, Celeste Warren, a business owner, only 34, holding a clipboard, just doing her job, surrounded by the beautiful things she'd built. She wasn't some villain or a homewrecker. She was just another person Ethan had lied to, and Jessica was about to tell her that her entire successful company was being funded by a crime. My boss's crime. Jessica said she walked right up to Celeste and introduced herself, the wife of the man bankrolling her dream. She said the ambient noise of the workshop just seemed to vanish. Jessica had been ready for screaming, for denial, for a fight. Instead, Celeste's face just drained of all color, and the clipboard she was holding slipped from her hand, cracking sharply against the concrete floor. I felt a chill as Jessica described leading this stranger back to her office, her own hands shaking so badly she could barely get the key in the lock. She said Celeste just collapsed into a chair and listened, her face a pale, empty mask, while Jessica laid out the entire disgusting truth with a calm that was almost inhuman. She never even raised her voice. She told Celeste exactly what the evidence I had already given her proved. The steady flow of cash Ethan was funneling into her business wasn't from some high-yield investment fund he managed. It came from one source and one source only: the inheritance Jessica's father had worked his whole life to leave her, stolen with a forged signature on a loan she never knew about. Just hearing Jessica retell it felt like getting punched in the chest. I heard her voice finally break as she described Celeste's reaction, how this powerhouse of a woman just seemed to implode. Then, the shock turned into pure, cold rage. Celeste started talking, and the rest of the lies, every single one, came flooding out about how Ethan had approached her at a charity gala 6 months before, making her feel like the only person in the room. I remember that gala. I bought the tickets. Celeste repeated the same tired script he used on everyone. The brilliant but lonely man, trapped in a loveless marriage. He swore to her that he and Jessica were over, just roommates waiting for a good time to finally split. He had sold her the fantasy that she wasn't destroying a family. She was his escape. He was always so damn convincing. The affair, though, was just the cover story. The real scam became brutally clear when Celeste spun her laptop around and opened her accounting software. That so-called profit-sharing deal, the exclusive partnership he'd promised her, it was all a smokescreen. My boss wasn't her partner. He was using her entire business as a personal washing machine for stolen cash. When they put Celeste's actual invoices next to the wire transfers I had on my hard drive, the fraud was almost comical. The payments he was sending were enormous, 2 or 3 times the amount of any real work order. He was using her company's letterhead on fake invoices to justify the cash he was pulling from the fraudulent loan. He hadn't just broken her heart, he had turned her life's work, her beautiful, legitimate business, into a criminal enterprise. The personal betrayal Celeste felt was instantly incinerated by a sudden, protective fury. Her company, her reputation, her future. He had put it all on the line. Without a second of hesitation, she typed in her password and gave Jessica absolutely everything. And just like that, they were a team. 2 women Ethan had tried to pit against each other were now united against him. They combed through every text, every email, and then they found it. The secret calendar. My heart stopped when Jessica told me. He called it project development and told me to never touch it. It wasn't just for Celeste. Celeste wasn't the other woman. She was just the one who lived in the same city. Ethan wasn't just a cheater. He was running a national operation. He used the same lies, the same sob story about his dying marriage on successful women all over the country. Using the calendar I had access to all along, Jessica started making calls. The first was to a real estate broker in Raleigh he was seeing on weekends. He told everyone, including me, he was visiting his father's grave. Jessica's voice, she said, was like a razor blade. She sounded like an FBI agent, not a grieving wife. She informed the broker that Ethan Crawford was the subject of a federal fraud investigation, and that, as a professional courtesy, she should make sure her own finances weren't caught in the blowback. The audacity was breathtaking. The woman in Raleigh didn't ask a single question about the marriage. She heard the steel in Jessica's voice, said a quiet, "I understand," and had blocked Ethan's number before Jessica even ended the call. The next text message went out to an art dealer down in Charleston. "This woman," Jessica said, actually tried to defend him. He still had his hooks in her pretty deep, so Jessica, with Celeste nodding beside her, sent the proof. I was the one who compiled it, a complete timeline of his flights, showing how his trips to see the art dealer in Charleston overlapped perfectly with his weekends with the broker in Raleigh and his work meetings with Celeste. The fantasy evaporated in real time. 20 minutes later, a screenshot appeared on Jessica's phone. It was a text from Ethan to the woman in Charleston, sent the night after he and Jessica had dinner at his mother's house. My boss was bragging to his mistress about putting his wife back in her place, calling Jessica fragile and needy. He wrote that she would always take him back. And sitting there, staring at that screen together, his wife and his mistress stopped being his victims. They became the architects of his ruin. It stopped being about the man almost immediately. The second Jessica and Celeste sat down together, it became about justice. They were 2 sharp, professional women who realized the same predator had targeted them. For Celeste, the risk to her business was an existential threat, and that cold, clear-eyed rage made her Jessica's most powerful ally. So Celeste handed over everything, gigabytes of data, every email, every saved voicemail filled with his lies, his flight records, and most importantly, every legitimate invoice her company had ever created. It was the master key to proving the fraud. And while I was helping Jessica sort through that mountain of evidence, I found the time bomb he was about to set off. It was buried in an email chain between Ethan and a property developer. He was days, maybe only hours, away from sending a massive, non-refundable wire deposit for a new luxury condo downtown. The second I saw that draft email, I knew that if that money was sent, Jessica's inheritance would be gone, legally washed and lost forever. I picked up the phone. To even try fighting it in court would take years and bleed her dry of everything she had. She told me later that in that moment she knew she had to kill that wire transfer. When she called me, the panic in her voice was gone. Something else was there, something hard and cold I'd never heard from her before. This wasn't about a broken heart anymore. This was about survival. What Ethan did to Jessica was so much more than cheating. It was a sick, methodical fraud he ran across multiple states, leaving a wake of smart, broken women behind him. Because of the evidence another one of his victims gave her, Jessica was the only one who could see the entire ugly web he had spun. She was the first person who could link all the pieces of his lies together, and she was planning to use his own blinding arrogance to bring him down. I saw the pain in her posts online just vanish, replaced by this sharp, almost scary focus. That next Monday, she didn't show up to her marketing job. She went to see a lawyer named Marianne Tate instead. Marianne was a predator, the kind of attorney whose name made guys like Ethan Crawford nervous. She wasn't the type to send a polite warning letter. She was the person you hired to get a judge to freeze a con artist's bank accounts before he could vanish with the money. Jessica told me she walked into that high-rise office and never shed a tear. She just placed the encrypted thumb drive I had given her on that massive mahogany desk. She laid out the whole timeline, the forged loan papers I'd unknowingly helped prepare, the shell corporations. And Marianne just sat there listening with this intense, unwavering focus. In under 20 minutes, Marianne had her whole firm moving. Jessica spent the rest of the day locked in a conference room with a forensic accountant, taking apart the loan application I had filed. The analyst immediately focused on the digital trail of the remote notary service Ethan had me use. He found exactly what she expected him to. The digital signature was time-stamped from a server less than a block from our office, which proved Ethan lied under oath when he said Jessica was there in person. Worse, the biometric scan was just a grainy photo of her old driver's license, which I had scanned for HR purposes 5 years ago. It was such an arrogant, sloppy job, and now they had the digital breadcrumbs to prove it. To lock down the history of the studio building, Jessica called her friend Nora Bell. Nora works for the city in property records and knows real estate law inside and out. Ethan never saw it coming. I found out later Jessica didn't do it by herself. Her lawyer, Marianne, had her and that poor girl Nora up all night, powered by endless cups of coffee. They unearthed every single document on that studio Ethan was so proud of. They found the original deed from Jessica's uncle, tax records from the last 15 years, every single permit. It was all in her name, her maiden name, a fortress of paperwork even Ethan couldn't breach. Ethan Crawford's name wasn't on a single document. He hadn't invested 1 cent into that property, not officially. Armed with a mountain of evidence, Jessica and her lawyer aimed for the kill shot. They didn't call some customer service line. They walked straight into the bank's corporate headquarters, into the fraud division. Ethan's biggest deal was now a fraud investigation. They laid out the entire story, every single sordid detail, the signature he forged, the lie about the IP address, the company I had set up for him. Jessica said the bank vice presidents looked physically ill, and that lawyer, Marianne, she insisted they freeze every single account tied to Ethan's name. She was clear. Ethan was not to get any warning. They knew his type, you see. They knew if he got a heads up, that money would be in an offshore account in less than 48 hours. They had to strike while he was completely unaware. At the same time, they filed some emergency injunction on the studio itself, putting it on complete lockdown. That one court order meant he couldn't sell it, couldn't use it as collateral, couldn't do anything with it. They had that property so buried in legal red tape, he couldn't have borrowed $100 on it. After setting all the traps, Jessica had to go home. I heard she drove back that Wednesday and my stomach was in knots just thinking about it. The way she talked about it later, it was like she was a stranger in her own home. She went straight to their bedroom closet, to the big fireproof safe I knew he kept there. She took out her inheritance documents, her grandmother's rings, all the insurance policies, anything with financial or sentimental value. She loaded everything into 2 large duffel bags, threw them in her car, and moved them to a new safety deposit box at a small credit union he didn't even know existed. She was systematically removing all the leverage he had over her, making sure he couldn't use her own family heirlooms as weapons. It was calculated. It was brilliant. She wasn't the woman I thought she was. It was while all this was happening that her lawyer called with the news that made me decide to save myself. A paralegal digging through old digital county records had found a second document. My boss, the brilliant Ethan Crawford, had quietly filed for a full, durable power of attorney over his own wife. He hadn't activated it yet. It was his final move. If that fraudulent loan had gone through without a hitch, he would have used her own name, completely legally, to liquidate her stocks, drain her 401k, and leave her with nothing. He was planning to financially ruin her. That's when I knew. That's when every excuse I ever made for him turned to ash in my mouth. This was never about a bad business deal. His plan was to completely erase her. When Jessica heard the news, her lawyer told her that from that moment on, she had to go dark, not by running away, but by becoming emotionally invisible to him. Marianne's instructions were specific. No more angry text messages. No more sad, vague posts on social media for their friends to gossip about. She was forbidden from playing the role he expected, the hysterical, heartbroken wife. A man like Ethan, the lawyer explained, feeds on that kind of chaos. He gets off on the drama he manufactures. He was counting on tears and furious phone calls. That's how he knew he was still in charge. If she raged, he'd call her unstable. If she wept, he'd savor her misery. The only way to truly throw him off his game was absolute silence. And Jessica was more than ready to give it to him. She told me she walked in that night and he was in the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of that 20-year-old bourbon he was so proud of, psyching himself up for the fight he was itching to have. He gave her that tight, confident smile, the one I used to find charming but now just saw as predatory. And she gave him absolutely nothing back. She walked past him as if he wasn't even there, her expression a complete void. She got a bottle of water and went upstairs to the guest bedroom. She said the sound of the lock clicking echoed through the entire silent house. For the next 3 days, that quiet was both her weapon and her armor. She didn't ask him where he'd been. She didn't flinch when his phone buzzed late at night with texts from other women, or even with texts from me. Messages I was now sending on the instruction of her legal team, just to keep him off balance. She treated him like a stranger, with a polite, vacant look in her eyes. She said you could literally watch the confusion on his face curdle into pure paranoia. He had a whole script planned, a huge dramatic fight where he was the wronged hero. But his co-star had just walked off the stage. He tried every trick in his book to get a reaction from her, but she had already severed every one of his puppet strings. He mistook her silence for surrender. He had no idea it was the sound of the executioner getting ready. The process server who finally got him was just a regular guy in a wrinkled jacket holding a large manila envelope. He caught Ethan on a Monday morning, 9 a.m. sharp, right in the center of the glass and steel lobby of our office building. Ethan was probably holding his $9 latte thinking about his weekly numbers. They served him with the injunction and the summons for felony fraud right there, in front of the security team and the reception desk he loved to brag about. My own desk phone started ringing exactly 6 minutes later. I just stared at his name on the caller ID, my heart hammering against my ribs. Jessica let his first 2 calls roll to voicemail, exactly as Marianne had instructed. She answered on the 3rd try. She told me she just put the phone to her ear and said nothing. I know that voice he uses. That fake sugary charm oozes out, the one that always worked on me. He used some old nickname for her, trying to sound like a confused, innocent victim. He asked her what all this insane paperwork was about. She just let the silence stretch, forcing him to stew in it. That sweet tone in his voice soured pretty quickly. I can just see it. The panic began to set in. He started talking faster, demanding to know why she'd sick a lawyer on him, why she hadn't just talked to him first. When she still refused to speak, the panic twisted into something much uglier. It became pure, unadulterated rage. He dropped his voice to that venomous whisper he uses when he really wants to cause pain. He was probably hiding in a bathroom stall on the executive floor. He hissed that the loan was a brilliant financial strategy for them, something her simple mind just couldn't comprehend. He tried to claim that horrible toast at his mother's dinner party was just him being brutally honest. And then he actually had the audacity to accuse her of doing all of this just because her feelings were hurt. He tried to frame grand larceny and identity theft as if she were just some spoiled little girl throwing a tantrum because he had embarrassed her. I wasn't there, but I heard what happened. Sarah let him exhaust his whole tirade, then coolly delivered the line her lawyer must have scripted. "Ethan, you took out a loan in my name. From now on, speak to my attorney." Then she ended the call and blocked his number. The first tremor. That phone call didn't just end a marriage, it cratered his career. Before 11 o'clock, a letter from Sarah's lawyer, Marianne, landed in every senior executive's inbox. It was a cold, professional takedown, accusing a director of using company resources to commit a serious, federal crime. In a place that manages billions for clients, that kind of liability is a death sentence. An exec using a work laptop for identity theft? The fallout was immediate. His access card was dead by the time he returned from lunch. I watched IT confiscate his computer. He was gone, suspended pending an internal review. The story got crazier. I later learned from legal discovery that Ethan's own mother, Darlene, had made it worse. She'd apparently called Sarah's sister, Chloe, completely hysterical. The transcript was brutal. She was just this raw, panicked voice begging for them to stop, not realizing she was digging her own son's grave even deeper. It was a total meltdown. She tried to justify it, of course. Darlene told herself she was just trying to fix things, to appeal to Chloe's kindness. But what she really did was plead and beg, trying to frame grand larceny as some kind of simple business dispute. She even accused Sarah of being melodramatic. I read the deposition, and you could practically hear the desperate, cloying tone in her words. She called it protecting her child. Through her tears, she started talking about the new condo, how it represented their family's future. Then she made the fatal mistake. She let it slip that she'd seen the architectural plans months earlier, that she knew it was a guaranteed win from the very beginning. She thought she was building sympathy. Instead, the sudden icy silence on the other end of the phone told her everything. She had just admitted to knowing about the conspiracy. Ethan had been planning to steal Sarah's inheritance for months, and his own mother just confirmed she was in on it from the start. Chloe's voice, I heard, was like ice. She just said thank you and hung up. That little confession was the key that unlocked their whole case against him. Meanwhile, the carefully crafted story Ethan was feeding their social circle was already starting to fall apart at the seams. Most of their friends were just shocked, watching this picture-perfect marriage implode. But the truth started seeping out. At first, I was still under his spell. I even made a few calls myself, trying to do damage control for him, telling people it was a misunderstanding. But seeing Ethan in the office before he was suspended, that brittle, simmering rage under the surface, it started to scare me. I remember sitting at my desk after he was walked out, just staring at my screen. I thought about the weeks leading up to this, the strange energy he had. He was coiled tight. This cold, predatory excitement I mistook for ambition. My gut screamed that something was off, but I ignored it. I told him he was killing it. I booked the cars. I enabled him. I was his biggest cheerleader. Then I heard about the recording. The company lawyers were buzzing about it. I could just picture Sarah's sister, Chloe, plugging a flash drive into her laptop. I imagined the party noise in the background, the clink of ice in a glass as Ethan got ready to torch his own life. And then hearing his voice, not the charming boss I knew, but a cold, calculating stranger. "She will fight," he said on that recording. That's the part that stuck with me. The sheer confidence in his voice was terrifying. When Sarah thinks she's losing, she always fights back. In that one secretly recorded sentence, every lie he'd ever told me and every lie I'd told myself about him just evaporated. This wasn't a man having a crisis. It was a plan, a cold, premeditated psychological attack. He knew exactly how she'd react because he designed the whole thing to make her. He was boasting about how he could manipulate his own wife. That's when I knew I was next. I was the assistant, the one with all the records. I had to save myself. I became the betrayal from inside his own company. The moment the company lawyers sent the legal hold notice, everything changed. That email demanded I preserve every single document, email and text. Any loyalty I had left for Ethan died right there. I saw my whole future flashing before my eyes. Federal charges, prison, survival mode kicked in. You can't blame a girl for that. So on Wednesday night, I did it. From my personal laptop, I sent a massive encrypted file to Marianne, Sarah's lawyer. I was terrified he would drag me down with him, so I gave them everything. It was the complete blueprint of his fraud. Every fake meeting I put on his calendar, every fake project code I created to mask the wire transfers. The file had the server logs, undeniable proof Ethan used his work computer to create that forged digital notary seal. Even worse for him, it had the expense reports, the ones I filed. It proved he was spending Sarah's money on fancy trips and expensive gifts for other women, corroborating everything Sarah had already found. By Thursday, the untouchable reputation Ethan had, the one I'd helped him polish every single day, was completely gone. It was just a pile of dust. He wasn't the visionary leader or the brave husband breaking free. The evidence I sent proved what he really was. It showed them the monster I had been working for. He was a common thief, a manipulative, desperate man who tried to paint his wife as crazy to cover his tracks. The whole plan depended on her having a public breakdown. He thought the chaos would be the perfect cover for his wire transfers, betting she'd be too wrecked to ever check her bank statements. But Ethan was about to learn how badly he'd miscalculated. He hired the exact kind of lawyer you get when you're guilty, but rich. A shark in a $5,000 suit whose whole job was to turn financial crimes into some kind of confusing, emotional drama for the jury. His lawyer's first move was unbelievable. He filed a motion claiming Sarah had given implied consent. The argument was insane, that because they'd talked about the future and because she also worked in finance, she had somehow telepathically approved of him forging her name and stealing her entire inheritance. It was breathtakingly dishonest. They were trying to relabel forgery and theft as a joint investment with a communication problem. But Sarah's lawyer, Marianne, didn't bite. She completely ignored the narrative and replied with a cold, simple, and absolutely brutal timeline of his actual crimes. I heard all about that first deposition. Sarah trapped in a horrible little conference room while Ethan's lawyer prowled around her. He kept pushing her about her feelings, her pain, her humiliation. His voice was apparently dripping with this fake concern that would have made my skin crawl. He was digging for an emotional breakdown he could use in court, desperate for a soundbite of the hysterical wife to sell his story. But Sarah gave him absolutely nothing. From what I was told, she was like stone. She refused to talk about her feelings or even mention the other women. In 4 hours, she never once said the word affair. Every single time he tried to bait her about her emotions, she just calmly steered the conversation back to the facts. She only discussed the forged documents, the fake identity checks, her exclusive rights to her accounts, and the exact bank numbers he used. But when Sarah's lawyer found the other woman, that's when I finally grasped how sick he was. An interior designer named Laura. He had pulled her into his mess, creating fake invoices to launder money through her business with a shell company. This was all happening long before he ever pretended to her that his marriage was over. Knowing what I knew made me physically sick for months. When I heard that Chloe, the woman he was seeing, had walked into a lawyer's office and signed an affidavit, I felt a strange mix of terror and relief. Her hand must have been rock steady signing that paper. She laid out in perfect detail how Ethan Crawford used her design studio, her entire life's work, as a washing machine for the money he was bleeding from his own wife's accounts. Her testimony was the beginning of the end. Chloe turned over years of her own pristine financial records, every single invoice proving the money he funneled from his shell company was pure fiction. It was an act of unbelievable bravery. At the same time, we were all hearing whispers that the bank's internal fraud investigation had already cooked his books. They handed over their server logs, every crooked transaction he made, all authenticated and time-stamped. The walls were closing in. I never saw the actual fraudulent mortgage documents myself, not at first, but I heard exactly what the investigators found. The signature wasn't forged from some burner laptop in a hotel. The digital breadcrumbs led directly back to the company's IP address, to the terminal on my desk. They used to say, "Poor, devoted Alyssa." I wasn't devoted. I was a fool, hypnotized by a charismatic monster, until I was forced to see what I had become a part of. The proof of his colossal fraud was undeniable, locked in databases and bank records. But I learned that when you back a man like Ethan into a corner, he doesn't get clever. He gets vicious. On some miserable, rainy Tuesday, I heard about his final, pathetic attempt to regain control. The show was officially over. For everyone else, the story might have started on a rooftop. But for me, it began the day I got the call from the feds. The final desperate act came when I learned Ethan had gone to Chloe's design studio looking like a wreck. He wasn't carrying flowers this time. He was holding old building plans, a sad prop from some long-dead project, trying to remind her of a time when she actually thought he was one of the good guys. I can just picture him calling his mother that night, his voice doing that low practice thing he does, the one he used on me 100 times to get what he wanted. He probably told her he got caught in the rain going to see Chloe, that it was all some terrible misunderstanding. He would have promised her total honesty, that they could fix it if she just refused to testify. All I could think about was his wife, Sarah, and the web of lies I helped him spin. He would have gone on about his reputation, about their supposed future, calling this whole federal crime a simple mistake, a passion that just got out of hand. My stomach churns just thinking about it, because I know he never once mentioned the financial ruin he dragged that poor woman's business into. He wouldn't have said a word about the fake documents he had me draft and that he coerced her into signing. It was always about him. When Chloe finally told him to get out, his whole act must have dropped. He would have let his voice get hard, that quiet, threatening tone I knew so well. He probably reminded her about the new loan on her studio. He was trying to smear his own filth on her, suggesting that if the government looked into her finances, they might find something, trying to make her feel as trapped and dirty as he was. He was trying to scare her into being his accomplice after the fact, but she didn't break. Instead, she just pulled out her phone, dialed Sarah's lawyer, a woman named Jessica Morgan, and put the call on speaker. When I heard that part of the story, a cold, unfamiliar feeling started creeping in. It felt a little bit like hope. That lawyer's voice, from what I was told, was like ice. She informed him in no uncertain terms that witness intimidation is a felony offense. She made it crystal clear that their entire conversation was just overheard by legal counsel and would be promptly turned over to the court and the U.S. Attorney's Office. His mouth must have gone bone dry right there in her bright, beautiful studio. He probably just turned and walked out, leaving the blueprints on her table like a ghost. But the part that truly sealed it for me, the thing that made me pick a side, came the night before the trial. I got a call from my own lawyer with an update from the prosecution. He told me they'd recovered something from Ethan's hard drive during discovery, a file he had tried to scrub permanently. It was a draft contract that made it hard to breathe. My boss wasn't just using Chloe's business to hide money he'd stolen from Sarah. He was actively trying to sell off 30% of Chloe's entire company to an outside investment firm. The whole disgusting plan was right there in legalese. The moment the fraudulent six-figure loan in Sarah's name cleared, he was going to sell a massive chunk of Chloe's business to a complete stranger. He would have walked away with the cash, leaving Chloe shackled to a new partner and a company poisoned with his fraud. That one document changed everything. The next day in court wasn't just about a man who cheated on his wife. It was about saving Chloe's entire future. It became a desperate race to legally cut every tie to my boss before he could drag another innocent person down into the abyss with him. I didn't sleep at all that night. The air in my apartment felt heavy with guilt. For the first time, all the excuses I had made for him, that he was brilliant, that he was under pressure, crumbled into dust. The next morning, as I walked into the courthouse to testify against him, the weight of my own complicity was a physical burden. The courtroom had that generic smell of old coffee and fear, a universe away from the clean city air outside. I watched Ethan walk in, looking flawless in a dark, expensive suit. He was playing the role of the dignified, heartbroken husband, and for the very first time, the sight of him just made me feel profoundly sick. He sat beside his lawyer, projecting a performance of deep sadness. But then Sarah walked in, and she didn't look like a victim at all. I was sitting in the witness room, but I caught a glimpse of her with her friends, Nora and Chloe, and her lawyer, Jessica. They were a quiet, solid line of women that my boss had fatally underestimated. Once things started, I could hear it all from the hallway. I kept my eyes on the ceiling tiles because I couldn't stand the thought of him. Jessica, the lawyer, didn't start with the affair. She avoided all the personal drama Ethan was banking on to make himself seem like a tragic figure. She just stood up calm and methodical and began to lay out the cold, hard numbers. She walked the court through 15 years of Sarah's perfect financial history. Then she got to the $620,000 loan that Ethan had forged in his wife's name. Her voice was like steel. She presented the evidence of the fraud, the fake signatures, the specific account numbers he used to move Sarah's money into a shell corporation he'd made Chloe set up. Ethan's lawyer shot up, objecting, desperately trying to frame it all as part of their unconventional private life. The judge was clearly not buying it. You could tell he saw this for what it was, not a messy breakup, but felony grand larceny. Jessica's first witness was a bank manager, Mr. Peterson, who dismantled the fake loan application piece by painful piece. He confirmed the digital signature was a complete forgery. He read from the server logs, his voice echoing in the quiet room, proving the signature was executed from a computer located hundreds of miles from where Sarah was traveling for work. And then the final, almost comical nail in the coffin. The driver's license used for identity verification had been expired for over 3 years. Then I heard Jessica Morgan call Chloe to the stand. I felt my own body tense up. I knew Ethan was staring at her, but she never gave him a single glance. As she sat down and took the oath, I pictured Ethan's perfect, confident mask finally beginning to crumble. Chloe presented her own immaculate business records to the court, and then she showed them the fraudulent invoices Ethan had directed her to process. She explained, her voice unwavering, how the massive wire transfers had no connection to any real project her company had ever done. She was laying out the unvarnished, ugly truth. I can only imagine the panic on the face of Ethan's lawyer. He tried to paint my boss as just a bad bookkeeper having a personal meltdown. It was pathetic. Jessica let him sputter to a stop, and then she calmly asked the judge for permission to play a short audio file for the court. The room went completely silent. And then I heard it. The faint sound of a dinner party, clinking glasses, and background music. And cutting through it all was Ethan's voice, so clear and confident it felt like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a man in crisis. This was a predator coolly explaining his strategy. It was the voice of a man talking about his prey. "She'll fight," the whole court heard my boss say on that recording. "She always fights when she thinks she's going to lose something." Those two sentences, just hanging there in the silent courtroom, completely incinerated his defense. It was the sound of his calculated plan to defraud Chloe from the very start. For the final blow, Sarah's lawyer presented the server logs from Ethan's own company, Sable Arc Properties, the logs I had given them. My records proved that on the exact day and time the fraudulent mortgage was created, Ethan was logged into his secure work computer at the terminal on my desk. He had the motive, the means, and the opportunity. He was trapped. His lawyer, knowing it was over, made one last, desperate pitch. He stopped denying the theft entirely and argued that since the money was for their life together, the debt should be split down the middle between Ethan and Sarah. It was the last gasp of a guilty man. I heard he actually tried to argue in court that their marriage was a flexible partnership, and that she should have to share the consequences of his crimes. Sarah didn't even let him finish his sentence. She walked right up to the judge with the spreadsheet I had found on Ethan's private server. She tapped her finger on one specific line, the entry for the $620,000 loan. He had categorized his own crime as a shared marital debt. It was right there in his own words, his plan to force Sarah to repay half of the money he had stolen from her. The judge just stared at that piece of paper for what felt like 10 minutes, but was probably only 3 in complete and total silence. When he finally looked up at Ethan, his face was like stone. It wasn't just a lecture. The judge slammed his gavel down so hard it echoed through the room. He called the mortgage a fraud and declared it totally void, wiping the lien against Sarah's family home off the books. Next, he ordered an immediate freeze on every single asset in Ethan's network of shell companies and gave Sarah's team the power to claw back every dime he'd already spent. But the final blow was the one that landed the hardest. The judge leaned into the microphone, his voice low and serious, and said that given the mountain of evidence for identity theft, wire fraud, and forgery, he was legally required to forward the whole case to the state's Financial Crimes Unit for criminal prosecution. I watched Ethan, the man I once admired, just sit there looking like a statue. For him, this wasn't a divorce anymore. He was staring down the barrel of actual prison time. His wife, Sarah, simply stood up, put on her coat, and walked straight down the center aisle without a single backward glance. As I watched her walk out into the bright afternoon, I knew she was finally, truly free. And I was left in that silent room with the wreckage of the man I helped protect. Sarah got her whole life back, her name, her family's business, her future. But I think the most important thing she won was her freedom. The freedom to never again have to justify herself to a man who had calculated, down to the penny, how to make her pay for his own ambition, the man whose secrets I kept. I feel like I have to tell her story because my silence was part of it for too long. It makes me wonder how many other people are standing just on the edge of a story like this. If any of this feels familiar to you, I really hope you find the strength she found, the strength to bring the truth into the light before a man like Ethan Crawford drags you down into the darkness with him.